Okay, so that's good. Right, okay, I think we're ready to start. Thanks everybody for joining today's coffee morning session. We're delighted to have Iain Churcher and Claire from Claire O'Neill from Hymans Robertson today to talk about small scheme risk transfer opportunities and challenges. And we're delighted to have them on board. And thanks in advance, Iain and Claire, for your input today. As usual with Pension Playpen, we are now being recorded. So everybody, thumbs up. Thumbs up. Yeah, brilliant. Natalie, yeah, everybody's happy. Chris, thumbs up. Good. Okay, thank you very much. So we're being recorded. In usual fashion, we will open up the chat room. So if anybody would like to put comments in the chat room, please do. Henry and I may also hijack you if you have put a comment in the chat, bring you in to unmute and ask a question or make a point. Obviously, you can raise a hand at any point as well to bring you in to ask a question. But without any further ado, I will pass over to Iain and Claire, and yeah, look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. And yeah, thanks, Steve and Henry, for having us along. So we are going to introduce a discussion on current opportunities and challenges in the risk transfer market. And we're also going to touch on some of the alternative endgame options that are being talked about quite a lot. So the main focus is going to be on smaller schemes, the ones that don't typically get the same headline attention as some of the larger transactions in the market. But we are seeing smaller schemes increasingly get the spotlight with the government's push for more consolidation in industry. So we'll also touch on the recent DB consultation too. As first introduction, so don't be fooled by this very well-shaven individual. We are one and the same. My name is Iain Church, and I'm a risk transfer advisor at Hymans, and I look after our small scheme risk transfer proposition. So by small, generally mean transactions up to about 150 million in asset size. And given the business in the market, we decided at Hymans to have a specialist team that focuses on schemes of this size, because insurers are increasingly selective and having to decide which schemes they dedicate their scarce pricing resource. So my sort of day-to-day job is to focus on how we can get those sort of schemes more attention with insurers, and then look to translate that into more competitive pricing. So I'm joined today by my colleague Claire O'Neill, who's one of our senior consultants. She has experience working on schemes of all sizes. Claire's actually had a very busy start to the year. So just in January and February alone, she completed over £1 billion of buying transactions. So we're keeping her very busy at Hymans. But she's also got expertise on multi-employer schemes. So some of those schemes can have sections that can be very small, down to below £1 million of assets. So she's got a lot of experience dealing with some of the small complexities you get with those types of arrangements. So the agenda, we were just going to quickly walk through some activity we've seen in 2023, and then touch on the themes that we saw emerging, and as they will translate into 2024 and beyond, and then talk about the challenges and opportunities that are out there, including the recent DB consultation, and then leave plenty of time for a good Q&A discussion. So just starting with 2023. So we're still waiting for some of the insurers to publish their final end year results, but it's looking like there are around 50 billion of transactions. So that is a record year. The next highest was 44 billion in 2019. Now, obviously, since then, we've had a large increase in interest rates. So if you actually convert that 50 billion into old money, that's more like 75 billion of transactions. So huge growth compared to the last few years. And actually, we think that business is not going to let up anytime soon. We see there being at least 50 billion of transactions every year and well into the early 2030s. So on this level of activity, we see as being a new normal in the market. Now, with that level of business, there was a lot of concerns at the start of 2023 because of all these large transactions in the market, how busy insurer pipelines were. Smaller schemes were going to get crowded out as insurers look to focus on the larger deals. But actually, our experience has been different. We've seen a very active smaller end of the market. So in 2023, over 150 transactions were below 100 million in size. So that's actually 60% of the market. So still, well over half the market is small schemes transacting. Now, the lion's share of those transactions were among a small number of insurers. So Aviva, Legal & General and Just did the majority, but actually several insurers did transactions at that end of the market. So still a wide range of opportunities for schemes last year that were looking to fully insure. And actually, even all of our smallest cases, so we class those as ones under about 30 million in assets, all of those cases had more than one insurer quoting. So it continued to be a competitive market for small schemes despite the busyness. Now that level of activity in part was made possible due to some innovations on the insurer side. So we had some of the existing players increase the capabilities. So Canada Life, for instance, they entered the full scheme buyer market in the middle of the year and did their first deferred member transaction, having only done pensioner-only business in the past. And I expect we'll see Canada Life continue to participate more in 2024. So that increases the range of insurers active at the small end of the market. We also saw some existing insurers increase their focus on their efficiency of both their pricing and then the subsequent onboarding of schemes. So leveraging technology to enable the same number of people to turn around more quotes and onboard more schemes. And I think that trend of insurers focusing on pricing and onboarding efficiency is going to be a trend that continues in 2024. And then lastly, just on pricing. So we saw some really good pricing on small cases, but it definitely wasn't consistent. So for example, we had a £10 million case where the difference between the best and worst price from insurers was 10%. So about £1 million for a £10 million case. So really, really big differences in pricing. So often we found our advice to schemes being actually be patient. You might have got a price that you're not happy with now. Don't take it. Don't feel like you have to. Just wait. There's other insurers out there. And actually, as the year went on, we were able to get other insurers engaged in those cases and actually turn it into getting some really good pricing. So as we'll come on to, I think what we'll also see in 2024 is more insurers participate at the small end of the market, and in turn, that will also increase pricing pressure on insurers to put forward competitive pricing. But on the whole,
can I just butt in here very quickly? A lot of consultants talk to us about exclusivities in the small market. It doesn't sound like you've been operating exclusive arrangements with any of your clients. What's making you different?
So I think we see exclusivity as a useful tool, but it's not necessarily the default, and we don't think schemes should be forced to go exclusive. So we actually had a couple of larger deals that were exclusive, but they had their own reasons. So for instance, one was self-insuring with their own sponsor. So for them, it made a lot of sense to actually go exclusive because it was in everyone's interest that those members were kind of found a home with their previous employer. And we had another case actually where the client had a choice. They could do a competitive process with one group of insurers or go exclusive with another insurer. And actually they chose to go exclusive with that other insurer because there were reasons other than price. So that insurer, they were more comfortable with the admin arrangements, with the brand name, and also they had some complexities around liquid assets. So I think exclusivity is a tool. I think it can be used in the right circumstances for that scheme to achieve their objectives. But I think what we found, because of the efficiency that insurers were able to deliver in terms of the pricing, we were able to get multiple insurers to quote on some of the smaller cases. So definitely schemes weren't defaulting into exclusivity.
Thanks.
Okay, and yeah, so I think I was just saying that I think what we will see in 2024 is more insurers move into the small end of the market. So actually, I think we're going to see even more competition for smaller schemes going into 2024. Okay, let's hand over to Claire to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities.
Great, thanks, Iain. So I think we'll start with administration capabilities and specifically administrator capacity, which is a real challenge for both schemes and insurers. And there are a few different aspects to this. So firstly, for trustees that have decided that insuring the scheme's benefits is the right decision for them, well, before approaching insurers, they need to be comfortable that the data and benefits information that they're sharing is of good quality. Because if the data is wrong, then the insurance cover won't fully match the benefits that are payable to members. For schemes looking to move to buyout, so just as a quick recap, so buy-in is when you purchase a bulk annuity policy with the insurer, and the relationship between the trustees and the scheme members remains unchanged. So the bulk annuity policy is a policy between the trustees and the insurer, and it's an asset scheme. That's buy-in. Buy-out is when you convert that bulk annuity policy to individual member policies. The trustees step away and the relationship becomes between the insurer and the members individually themselves. So for schemes that are looking to move to buy-out, an extra level of due diligence on the data is required, given that after buyout, there's no longer that opportunity to correct the benefits that have been insured. This means that administrator resource is required to provide all of the necessary scheme data, to answer any queries on the data extracts, and to review, cleanse and verify the data before buy-in or buy-out. But administrator resource is stretched at the moment, and that's well documented across the industry. So there can be a bit of a wait to get that data that's needed, and there can also be some moving parts to navigate through, which is a bit of a challenge for trustees. For example, they're looking at their GMP equalisation exercises at the moment. Administrators are looking at pensions dashboards, so there's a lot of different calls on administrators' times, and trustees kind of need to navigate that. Secondly, whilst insurers typically don't take on administration until buyout, there is still insurer-side administration to be done during buy-in, like calculating the correct payroll and providing member calculations. Then from buyout, the insurers take on the full administration responsibilities. So the insurers are feeling the same pinch and admin resource that trustees are, because ultimately they're calling on the same pool of people. So when choosing whether or not an insurer is going to provide a quotation on your scheme, they have to be mindful of their post-transaction administration capacity, not just their capacity to write the initial deal. We know one insurer in particular is explicitly limiting the number of small scheme pricing slots that are available each month based on their post-transaction capacity to actually onboard those schemes and subsequently administer the policies. So admin capacity is creating a challenge on both sides there. The second area that could potentially create challenge for both trustees and insurers alike is the current corporate bond market dynamics. So on average, we estimate that around 1/3 of the assets that insurers use to back their bulk annuity transactions are corporate bonds or high quality credit. When we see the difference in yields on corporate bonds and otherwise equivalent government bonds widen, we tend to see insurer pricing improve. So in other words, when we see credit spreads widening, we usually see better insurer pricing. Now at the moment, we're seeing narrow credit spreads, which is not what we might typically expect given the economic uncertainty and some fears of recession at the moment, which we would normally expect to lead to a widening of credit spreads, and so we would expect that to lead to an improvement in insurer pricing. Now we can't be certain about what's causing the bond market dynamics at the moment, but we do speculate that a significant driver is the high demand for high quality credit assets. This demand is coming from both pension schemes, who generally would switch their assets to high quality corporate bonds and gilts as they approach a transaction, because it makes it easier for them to transact with the insurer. And the demand is also coming from the insurers themselves, who are looking to purchase the assets to match their liabilities. We expect that the demand for these high quality credit assets is beginning to outstrip supply, so that will be a challenge to overcome this year. On the insurer side, it means perhaps looking for alternative sources of assets to back their deals, and on the trustee side, clearly impacting on pricing. The third final kind of challenge I wanted to talk on was mega deals. Sorry, question from Chris.
Sorry, Claire, I thought I'd just try and sneak that in while we were talking about corporate bonds. We've got a number of schemes that are kind of at the sort of buy-in level and got that funding, and they're trying to match their investment strategy before they approach a kind of insurer. They've tended to sort of match it with gilts rather than corporate bonds. We're seeing a bit more of a move towards corporate bonds, but is it kind of a bit half and half that you think sort of matches well, or it's an unfair question, but I just wondered if you had this kind of indication of how much corporate bond and how much sort of gilt.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think you know, insurer pricing is driven not just by kind of their assets, but also on other factors in the market at the moment. So you're not exactly going to be able to track insurer pricing exactly on that lead up to transaction until you're in a price lock, which is a kind of separate thing that would happen as part of the deal. But generally what I've seen is schemes looking to be between 40 and 60% invested in credit and between 40 and 60 in gilt. So are seeing that kind of split across credit and gilt assets.
Thanks.
Yep, no worries. So yeah, the last kind of challenge I was going to talk about was just the mega deals. So Iain kind of spoke at the start about the volume of transactions that took place last year, and actually quite a large number of those were in what we would refer to as mega deals, so deals in the $1+ billion range. And actually last year we had the largest deal on record, so it was a transaction of around $6 billion towards the start of 2023. Now we're expecting that to continue in 2024 and beyond. And anecdotally, we've heard from a number of insurers that they're expecting upwards of 10 requests for quotations in the £1 to £2 billion range over the next few months alone. So that creates both challenge and opportunities for trustees. So insurers bidding for those large transactions will set aside resource and assets to fund the deal. Now, with the insurers focusing their attention on that specific deal, it means that there is less capacity for the insurers to provide a quotation for other schemes. So that represents a challenge. Similarly, when one insurer is selected as the winner, that insurer could potentially be wiped out for a number of months, again, as they're focusing on that mega transaction and using up all of their available capital to write that deal. So again, that's reducing the insurer's availability to quote on other deals. On the other hand, when one insurer is selected as the winner, it normally means one or two other insurers are likely to have just missed out on that deal. And those insurers are likely to have sourced their assets and ring-fenced them in the hope of winning the mega deal. So when that falls through, they need to find other deals to allocate those assets to. So that creates a great opportunity for schemes that are already in the market at that time and are able to transact quickly to get kind of maximise that opportunity. Okay, that leads us nicely onto opportunities. Iain, if you want to switch us on to the next slide. Thanks. So yeah, we've mentioned the high demand and that's expected to continue, and that creates challenges. However, the market has responded to the high demand and is creating opportunities for schemes. So how is the market responding to high demands? Well, in short, the market is growing. So in 2023, we saw M&G become the 9th insurer active in the market. And in 2024, we're expecting to see 2 further insurers to start writing business. One insurer is expected to focus particularly on schemes with liabilities of less than around 100 million, whilst the other insurer, who we can name as Royal London, as we've seen that's now kind of out there in the press, they're expected to write small to medium-sized business, so business in the 50 to 500 million pound range. But we understand that they are looking to expand that range in due course. So when insurers have first entered the market in the past, or when they've started writing non-pensioner business, we've seen them provide particularly attractive pricing for the first few schemes to transact with them, because the insurers have been keen to demonstrate their credibility and to grow their business volumes. We've also seen the insurers looking to start with the small transactions just to build up their experience and their processes, rather than starting with, a big first transaction being a big one. So we might expect that pattern to be repeated again as these new insurers join the market, and that represents an opportunity for some schemes, particularly the small schemes, to transact at a lower price than might otherwise have been the case. It is important to remember that trustees should carefully consider insurers' non-price credentials before selecting an insurer, and we'd expect trustees would want to undertake an extra level of scrutiny if transacting with a new entrant, and getting comfortable with transacting with a new entrant might be challenging for some trustees, just given they are untested or perhaps unknown to the trustees. Now, whilst I've mentioned 2 new insurers expected to join the market this year, for completeness, I'd note that we're also expecting a number of other insurers and reinsurers who basically are considering entering the market. They're at a much earlier stage of discussion, so we're not expecting them to write business this year, but we are expecting to see further new entrants in the future. Beyond new entrants, there are further changes expected in the players in the market. So there are acquisition rumours in respect of one of the insurers, PIC, who are privately owned. And last week it was announced that Scottish Widows have sold their bulk annuity business to Rothsay, who are one of the insurers currently active in the bulk annuity market. And whilst the PIC rumours are interesting, ultimately it is a change in ownership. So we don't think it will have a big impact on the market, especially this year. Although we'd expect the exit of Scottish Widows to have a slightly bigger impact, as that represents a reduction in the number of insurers in the market, particularly at the smaller end, because Widows would write deals from around 150 million plus, whereas Rothsay focus on much larger transactions. So by Rothsay purchasing Scottish Widows, that does take away one of the insurers that was active in the smaller end of the market. That said, we don't think the impact will be massive. Again, certainly not this year, because Widows have historically only written a small number of deals each year, and so they're not one of the major players. Okay. Question from Alan.
Sorry, just taking myself off mute. When you say more insurers now and next year, do you think that will result in more capacity or just more competitive pricing for the reasons you've just given?
I think both. So I think it will increase capacity. So as mentioned, the 2 new insurers looking to transact at the smaller end of the market, and that should create more capacity. But equally, it will increase the competition at that end as well. Ultimately, there's still the same pool of kind of industry professionals and the same pool of assets. So, it's not going to be kind of a direct correlation of keep adding new players and capacity will continue to increase. There are constraints there, but I think feeling positive both from a capacity and a competitiveness perspective. Don't know, Iain, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I agree with all that. I think so Roland, for instance, they are doing a lot of stuff themselves. So some of their pricing resource they're bringing in from other parts of the business, building up their own administration team. So that should lead to kind of a net inflow of people into the industry. But I think as Claire's right, I don't think it's going to meaningfully move the dial, and suddenly we're going to be able to write a lot more business in this market.
Can I ask another question? It's to do with pricing. You mentioned that there's some competition. You can see spreads of, say, 10% in the price you get for a small scheme between the best and worst provider. Could you give us an idea of roughly what the spread would be between, say, £100 million deal and £1 billion deal, all else being equal, just in terms of economies of scale and so on?
To be honest, it can be similar. I mean, I had a case that was about 150 million earlier last year, and that had a 16% spread, so even bigger. I think what you do find is there are some insurers that are set up to be able to quote on lots and lots of stuff. And so they often would just participate in processes just to get feedback on where their price is relative to their competitors and not actually serious about putting forward a competitive quote. So you do see quite a range. I think as you get to the very large deals, then everyone's trying really hard to win those. So you'd probably expect a much smaller spread, sort of 3 or 4% maybe at the very sharp end. But typically, and when you kind of get to the medium-sized cases, you can still get quite wide spreads.
Okay, my second question was about TAS 300s. Is that really being honoured more in the breach than in the observance? I'm just wondering how many trustees really consider beyond buyout once they've set their hearts on it.
Yeah, it's a good question, because me and Claire mostly deal with schemes that have already decided on that as their objective. But obviously, certainly within our advice, a key part of that now is considering what are the alternatives. So we do obviously consider things like consolidation and things at that point in time.
So what happens if the word goes out, these guys are in the market for buyout, and consolidators come in and say, well, we're interested in quoting against this? Is there generally a lockout at that point, or might there be a reconsideration?
Well, to suppose to do as a consolidator at the moment, you need to pass the gateway test. So you kind of need to prove that insurance is not an option for the scheme. So I think that, probably a lot of discussions will probably, if the scheme can afford to insure and that's what they want to do, then consolidator becomes quite hard to actually legally get approval for.
Yeah, TAS 300 also covers roll-on, doesn't it? Or run-on, sorry, I get that
Yes,
phrase wrong. Where, for instance, there's a capital back journey plan competing for run-on. Is that a situation where you find, sometimes trustees have to pivot, or are these things generally sort of decided, pre-agreed, and therefore there's no opportunity for the for the alternative solution to be put forward?
Yes, I think so. It's before you kind of embark on one of these projects, there'll be a detailed discussion on objectives, because clients obviously wouldn't want to incur costs of doing these exercises unless they know that's what they want to do. I think we are having more conversations with clients now that there's obviously more detail coming out on the DB consultation about maybe some more flexibility for run-on around things like surplus extraction. But I think particularly for the smaller schemes, I think it becomes harder to justify run-on just given you haven't got the economies of scale, and often you have businesses that have been burnt quite badly in the past with additional deficit contributions to kind of get to this point. So I think, to be honest, a lot of their objectives is to just insure the scheme, just to remove that risk from the balance sheet.
Peter, I've seen you've had something in chat and now you've got your hand up. There's no stopping you. Do take yourself off mute.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Yes, I should explain I come from two backgrounds, one of which I am a sufferer from premature buyout, in that my pension rights currently are significantly reduced because my pension was bought out early compared to possibilities, and as a result, because of it was in a fairly small scheme where the on a pooled risk basis, and that risk disappeared shortly after it was bought out, in the terms of 3 leading directors died without issue. But the second thing is I tend to deal with finance directors of small companies, probably smaller than you've been talking about, and talk about pension scheme situations with under £100 million. And they are being told, oh, you really have no alternative, you will have to fund the scheme up to buy out. And but they've also got capacity constraints that means they can't fund at that level. So they have deficit recovery plans of over 10 years. And but they're still in existence 20 years after they close the scheme. So the risk of run-on is relatively small, provided the cash flow can be met. What they found is that the trustees have been following buyout paths and have suggested they should adopt particularly leveraged LGI, and hence they're securing the cost of buyout at solvency valuation historically, which was very high. And now that that cost has come down, they are locked in, and the scheme has not the cash flow to pay the pensions out for the duration of the pension scheme without additional cash inflow from either its investments or the company. So they're actually faced with a substantial increase in the deficit recovery contributions, purely because the scheme has been targeting buyout rather than run on. So, sorry, that's my.
Yeah, I mean, sounds a very difficult situation. I think, I think one of the challenges of the pensions regime is the stringent funding requirements. So, obviously, schemes in deficit are employers are being made to to cash fund schemes within a reasonable time period. So I think there are risks along the way that need to be managed, and obviously sounds in that situation that potentially taking on more leverage than they probably should have done at that point in time. But yeah, I think hindsight's 2020, and obviously the world changed quite a lot quite quickly with the mini budget and what happened with interest rates.
Yes, I mean that's the case. I mean, I should say that this is a sample of about 4 companies, but it's just the ones I happen to have contact with. Sorry, that was my end of my rant. Thank you.
Henry, you're on mute.
Thank you very much for that. Peter, thank you very much. Very helpful to hear from you and on behalf of those companies that you work with in your sort of capacity as bringing FDs together. I had a expectation that 1 or 2 people on this call would by now have wanted to put their hands up. But that not being the case, I will ask some of the questions which I suspect they would ask themselves were they not in a shy mood. But before I do, does anyone want to ask a question at this point who hasn't? Right, well, I'm very interested in the question of irreversibility. Once you've gone down this route, once the buyout has happened, and Peter mentioned the consequences of buying out at the wrong time, and of course nobody can predict the future in the case of somebody dying. But to what extent do we in this room feel that we are marching towards an inexorable and irreversible buyout culture without properly considering an alternative? And I put that to you guys somewhat unfairly, but you are consultants, so I'll ask for your opinion on that statement.
Yeah, interesting. I think so. Over time, well, DB schemes are pretty much all closed now. So I think from an employer perspective, they have this legacy liability that it's not benefiting current employees. It's a burden, and a lot of them are in a position now where they can afford to de-risk it. And I think many prudent CFOs would take the view that I'll fix the roof when the sun's shining, and if I can afford to remove this risk from my balance sheet, it makes sense to do it. I think those schemes are going to run off over time. They will shrink. So eventually it gets to a point where it's just not economical to continue to have that scheme sponsored by the employer. It makes more sense to pass insurance company because the capitalisation of those future costs exceeds any potential benefit of having that scheme. So I think the end of DB, in my view, unless we start having new schemes being opened up, is that eventually these schemes will find the insurance market. It's just a matter of when is the right time for different schemes and their circumstances. I don't think any scheme should totally be forced to buy out. I think there certainly are benefits of employers continuing to stay close to the scheme for as long as they feel they can support it. But I think also it also makes sense in a lot of circumstances to buy out.
I'd just add to that, Iain. I think, as Iain mentioned, we also work in the team that deals mainly with schemes that have already decided to insure and to move to buy-in and buy-out. But I think it's fair to say that we've not worked with a single set of trustees that hasn't wanted to either at the start undertake a kind of training exercise or a long-term objective setting session, or that hasn't already done that before they've made the decision to look for an advisor to advise on buy-ins and buyouts. So, my sense certainly is that, trustees aren't just blindly saying, yes, okay, let's do buy-in and buyout. There is a thought process there on, is it really the right thing that we want to do? And yeah, I think that at the moment the majority are landing on yes for the reasons that Iain has outlined.
Okay, well, I've got a question which has come in from outside the room, from Derek Benstead, who's a consultant at First Actuarial. And this is his statement and question. I've seen it argued that the aggregate value of employers sponsoring DB is an order of magnitude higher than the aggregate value of insurers taking on DB liabilities. So while one scheme transferring to an insurer might be de-risking, most of the private sector DB industry transferring to insurers might cause a systemic risk. I spent some time yesterday looking at TPR's prescription for funding and investment strategy statements. These focus on managing the assets to match the actuarial model and not at all on managing the assets to provide for benefit payments. DWP and TPR between them do not appear to be in the least bit interested in providing pension schemes as opposed to pots for the common good. So that was a position adopted by Derek and passed to me for comment from you this morning, in the spirit of actuarial challenge, I suppose, if that's such a thing.
So I think the question there is there a systemic risk of all pension schemes moving to buyout? Have I got that right? Yeah.
And is the pension regulation DWP aware of it or doing anything about it? Is the other part of it?
So yeah, I guess I'd say the PRA, who's the financial regulator of financial institutions, so insurers and banks, they have been doing a lot of focus on systemic risk in the insurance sector. So I mean, so it's very hot topic for them. One area of focus that they've been looking at a lot is around funded reinsurance. So actually insurance companies transacting buy-ins and then doing almost a buy-in themselves with offshore reinsurance companies. But actually their big concern is actually are we passing this risk offshore to a few counterparties in different jurisdictions, and if those arrangements collapse, what happens to people's pensions that insured? So it's a big focus. PRA is all over it, to be honest. And what happens if a reinsurer fails, then the insurance company in the UK has to recapture that risk. So they're putting a lot of pressure on insurance companies to have the right contractual arrangements, so that actually when that risk passes back, there's actually ring-fence assets offshore that satisfy the UK regulatory framework, so they can actually take that risk back on, have it on their balance sheet, and and weather that storm. And also, insurers are big focus for insurers is having diversified reinsurance panels, so they're not just all passing it all to single counterparties. And insurers themselves also hold additional capital against those credit risks. So, yes, the short answer is no. I don't think there's systemic risk. I think insurers also are diversified in lots of different ways. So, unlike pension schemes that are close to buyout, they don't just invest lots in gilts. They have a whole range of assets in their portfolio. They also, some of them will have other businesses that have offsetting risks. So if one part of your business sells pension annuities, one part sells life insurance policies, you get some sort of natural hedge to longevity risk. So I think actually insurers are a very safe home for DB liabilities.
Okay. I have another question from outside the room by one of the founders of the Pension Insurance Corporation that you were mentioning just now. His question is buying corporate bonds anything to do with the Mansion House Agreement, and can it be considered as helping Britain with its problems about productive finance? What's your view on insurance company investments in terms of their ESG, and in particular their capacity to meet the needs of an underperforming economy?
Yeah, so interesting. So I guess what we're seeing at the moment is insurers are trying to not buy UK corporate bonds because the spreads on them are quite unattractive. So actually insurers are looking at buying other assets, so be that sort of long-term infrastructure type assets that give regular cash flows so they can use to back liabilities, which they do look offshore for that, but they also look domestically. So they do actively invest in those sort of assets. other things as well. They're looking at things like solar farm leases, ground rents, which, yeah, a lot of UK domicile assets. So I wouldn't, to take the view that insurers are just looking at corporate bonds. I think actually the UK corporate bond market is not that big relative to insurers' needs. So actually they can't really just focus on corporate bonds because there's not enough new issuances to support the level of DB transfer activity.
I did see that there was a question from Con Keating in chat about the spreads that you referred to on corporate bonds. Can I read? Well, I don't know, Con, do you want to ask your question directly, or do you want me to read it for yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, you're coming off mute, so I'll take it that you're.
I'll ask the question myself. There are actually two questions in here. The first is just how much has the price of bulk annuitization gone down? In your introduction and in a press quote recently, Hymans quoted this figure that 50 billion today of buyout was 75 billion a couple of years ago. Interesting, TPR's figure for that is that 50 billion today would have been 90 billion a few years ago, back in end of 2021. That's a 44% decline in price, 44.5% in fact. The question really is, how much has the price actually declined? And related to that is, where are the spreads for pensioners and deferreds relative to gilts now? And what impact, if any, has the tightness in corporate bond spreads relative to gilts impacted the pricing of bulk annuity? Has bulk annuity become more expensive in the sense of spreads over gilts for pensioners declining and spreads under gilts for deferreds increasing? To what extent has that actually taken place?
Yeah, so good questions. I think so on the how much the price declined. I mean, the 75 billion, I'll be honest, is a bit of a back of the fag packet. So pretty rough and ready. I think there are a lot of components that go into insurer pricing. So one is kind of the asset side. A big thing that I guess has changed over the past few years has been the availability and competitiveness of deferred reinsurance. So insurers passing their longevity risk to counterparties. So actually that's improved quite a lot with more players entering the market. So that's obviously helped improve pricing. And the other thing is just interest rates. So the big rise in interest rates has caused premiums to come down quite a lot. I guess on the spread relative to gilts. So what's quite interesting is at the moment, corporate bond spreads relative to gilts are kind of very low compared to historic standards. But actually, if you look at corporate bond spreads relative to swap yields, which is actually what insurers use to set their pricing, they're actually around what they have been historically. So what's quite interesting is it looks like there's basically been quite a big sell-off of gilt yields, which is making the spread of corporate bonds relative to gilts look very narrow. I think actually a lot of that's driven by pension schemes actually getting to this endpoint, selling their gilts to then transact binds. So I think that's interesting. I think if you look at value relative to swaps rather than relative to gilts, you'll probably see that buying pricing is similar to how it has been in previous years. I think the headline level, though, is on a gilts measure. So pensioner pricing a few years ago might have been gilts plus 30 basis points. It's now probably about gilts plus 15 basis points on average. And deferred pricing, you might have seen it at gilts minus 30 basis points. That's probably gone now to about gilts minus 40, gilts minus 50 basis points. So relative to gilts, we have seen pricing come in. That is driven by what's kind of happening in the corporate bond market. But then generally there are just kind of actually there is continue to be quite a lot of competition amongst insurers. So there's not kind of price fixing. Everyone's agreeing to charge everyone more. They still are competing very fiercely to win the business. And then there's also a lot of competition on the back end. So things like between reinsurers to pass on competitive reinsurance quotes as well.
Sorry, who's buying all these gilts?
That's a good question. Don't have an answer to that, if I'm honest.
There doesn't seem to be a natural buyer for gilts if everyone's selling them and exchanging them for corporate bonds. You said it was a sort of 50-50 situation typically. That's quite different, isn't it, from the past? I'm just wondering, and I mean, one of the golden rules that the Chancellor had was that he preserved the gilt market. Just doesn't seem to be happening in this prepare for buyout world, or am I overestimating the impact of buyout on the market? Is it much smaller as a percentage of the 5,000 schemes than we've seen so far? I'm speaking here as a non-expert. Please, I'm not trying to ask you tricky questions. I'm just trying to find things out.
Well, yeah, I think there is kind of, refer to my investment consultants, but there definitely is a lot of kind of selling pressure on gilts at the moment because schemes are exiting them to do binds.
Alan's got your hand. You've got your hands up. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to add, as much as we're saying, credit's important for backing the deal and for insurer pricing, actually insurers at the moment certainly don't really like taking credit for payment, so they would rather you pay the deal in cash or in some cases gilt. So whilst credit's kind of more important in terms of pricing, there is still some demand there for gilts in terms of payment, albeit that's a much shorter term kind of discrete point of demand.
Alan, you've got your hand up. Thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Henry. Just with the super funds starting to get some traction now, Clara's done its second deal. Do you see those sorts of transactions being largely limited to distressed employers or employers with virtually no covenants, or do you see them becoming more attractive to solvent employers as part of either a long-term run-up or a bridge to buyout?
So we advised on the recent Debenhams transaction. So I think that was a great outcome for everyone involved. I think we do see it as being an option more widely for schemes. So in order to actually break the covenant link between the pension scheme and the employer, it does kind of need to be you need to pass kind of TPR's gateway test. So you need to kind of show insurance is not a viable option. But we do know that Clara, and I expect sort of new providers that enter the market, will have sort of similar arrangements where they maintain that covenant link. So you're not actually breaking the covenant link, but you have a third party coming in who's putting up some additional capital to improve the security of those benefits, with then the idea that obviously those investors' capital is kind of the first port of call if things do go badly to improve benefit security. So I think now, obviously, Clara's kind of a proven model that works. It's got its first few cases over the line. I think we could see more schemes starting to look at that sort of connected covenant type approach going forward.
Michael, you've got your hand up, unless Alan wants to come back on that.
No, I'm fine. Thanks very much, Iain.
Michael, do you want to take your hand off? Oh, you come off mute. Excellent.
Henry was saying he wasn't an expert in this area. I'm not an expert either. Indeed, I feel rather out of my depth.
Good.
You've talked a lot about buyouts and things. What is it for? What are the advantages to the insurers of all this? No one's talked about that at all. I mean, are the insurers somehow magicians who can make a lot of money out of things which are not run very well, or what? why would insurers want to go into buyouts and buy-ins and things?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is profit. So their business model is they take on the premium you pay them, they put up their own investors' capital, so you have a lot of capital against the liabilities. They then look to minimise the risks there, so they will hedge a lot of the risks. So they'll sort of pass on longevity risk, and they'll buy assets that give cash flows that match the liabilities. And generally, what they try and isolate is they're just really looking for credit return on the assets, and they kind of, as the liabilities run off, they kind of harvest that as a return, with the idea that over time they generate profit. So, yeah, you are obviously passing future profits to insurance company when we do these transactions. But in the status quo as well, people are making profit from the pension scheme. So you've got investment managers that are charging annual management fees. You've got consultants, you've got other service providers as well. So people don't do this for free. So there are profits being generated.
But strangely, the share price of organisations like Legal and General and Just doesn't seem to have moved up very much over the last couple of years, where you would expect, with this huge amount of business that they're writing, that they would have had the shareholders would have felt they'd had an absolute bonanza. I'm quite puzzled by that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting as well. I actually the other week sent around some messages internally about wishing I could buy some of the insurance companies, but obviously I can't because of conflicts. So yeah, you look at someone like, I think Aviva's paying like a 7% dividend and also buying back loads of their own shares. So yeah, I mean, not investment advice, but it feels like it's a good return to shareholders there. So what I've been to a few conferences where we've talked about this, and I think generally it's just the long-term nature of life insurance businesses just doesn't get a lot of attention from investors in the sort of general stock market. But we did see when Just posted their results, their share price shot up 20%. So there are some of these companies that are benefiting. But I agree. I think it's certainly interesting investment opportunities out there.
But you are saying, I think, that the insurance companies are better at running pensions than our trustees. That seemed to be what you were saying a bit earlier.
Well, I think insurers have the benefit of scale. So if you've got a £50 billion annuity book, there's a lot more you can do than a pension scheme that's got 50 million of assets and has to do the day job of actually running the company that sponsors it.
Yes, I suppose that's right, but I suppose I have another problem with it as well. All the reinsurance stuff. I mean, as an individual, I find that what I invested one day in something or other is now run by somebody entirely different, and I don't know who they are or what they are or anything, and all that reinsurance things. You've looked at the people who do the buyout, but then they go and do things, move their stuff on, and nobody actually may know what's going on. Showing how non-expert I am.
Sorry, Harry, you're on mute.
I don't think that sounds very unexpert at all. I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing. And one thing we haven't discussed today is how the members feel about these buyouts, because there's beginning to see a sort of groundswell of kind of concern among members about the fact that the buyout might not be in their best interest. It might be a good thing for employers and whatever. So, would you like to comment on whether or not you think members will become a little bit more vociferous about the direction of their pensions?
Yes, I think in the majority of circumstances, these are good outcomes for members. They are improving the benefit security. There's a lot more capital that's been put up against these pension liabilities. There's also things like a financial services compensation scheme that exists in the insurance world, which is better than the level of compensation provided by the PPF. So I think there's a lot of net positives there. I think as well, most of the insurers have got a very good track record on member administration and member service. So I think, someone like Aviva, for instance, they're several 100-year brand. They've been quite open, had a few challenges the last couple of years, but since then actually they put a lot of investment into improving their member service. And so I think long term, some of these insurers are going to be kind of good homes for members. I think there has been some stuff in the press about the benefits that have been secured. So, for instance, some members have had some discretionary benefits, like favourable retirement terms that they've lost on buyout. I think that's obviously a decision for the trustees on those cases, but I think definitely it's an area that trustees need to tread carefully to make sure that they are doing the right thing by their members. I think the cases that we've run, we haven't have instances of members complaining about the benefits have been secured. But obviously circumstances do different for different schemes, and trade-offs are made when these transactions are done.
Peter, you got your hand up again. Or is that just you?
Yeah, it was precisely on that point. Was about I was going to say, are you seeing? I was in a discussion with lawyers about buyouts and scheme surplus distribution, and basically, the consensus of the view was that certainly any surplus they had to use towards securing discretionary increases in the deed to date, and the discussion was whether in buyout terms they should hard code discretionary increases such as up to RPI over the duration of the pension, the old inland revenue maximum pension rules. In the buyout terms, they should hard code that into the terms of the buyout. I just wondered in practice whether that was happening.
I think we are seeing an increase in the number of schemes that are approaching the market with a surplus, and so kind of the reasons you outline, I think it depends what's in the scheme rules on who owns that surplus and what options are available. But it's certainly a conversation that would be started early in terms of what do we want to ensure. There are different options, and I think in a lot of cases, whilst you can estimate a surplus doesn't crystallise until the scheme is wound up. And so for that reason, some trustees might choose to not ensure discretionary pension increases at the outset, but they might look to ensure the policy has the option for them to increase the benefits insured, and then they can discuss kind of sponsor appetite, what's in the scheme rules, and consult with members as appropriate. So I think it's certainly an option to increase ensure your discretionary increases, but it's a conversation to be had and not a decision that can be made quickly once you've already got insurer quotes in and there's a surprise surplus. It's not the sort of area you can just quickly insure extra benefits because there's wider consequences for doing that.
Although ironically, that's what happens with a PPF assessment period. In that, in a sense, your PPF plus comes into play, and then you then have to determine what benefits can be bought with the assets available.
Yeah, I think the PPF plus assessment period is quite a lengthy process, and again with quite a different set of circumstances versus a scheme with a surplus on buyout.
And can I just ask about other discretionary benefits, such as the Boots early retirement? Are they usually reflected in buy-in terms that they could then perhaps change the benefits?
So generally, you'd go through a process of agreeing how the trust would go through a process of agreeing how they want to insure the various discretions. So I mean, the Boots case got a lot of press. It's not one that we're involved in, so we can't comment on what happened there. But yeah, generally we'd go through agree discretions we want to insure, and then the buy-in would look to reflect in its pricing the benefits you're expecting to pay on buyout.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, we talk quite a lot in the world of DC about member engagement as if it was a good thing. But it strikes me that in the world of DB, member engagement isn't a very good thing. Is that a fair comment?
In terms of we don't do enough of it? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm just thinking that by and large, DB members kicking up a fuss is seen as a bad thing.
Well, I think, yeah, any members kicking up a fuss is a bad thing for schemes. I think everyone's life's easier if members are happy.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how much awareness a lot of members have of what's going on. But I'll leave it at that because we're drawing to the end of this excellent session. And sorry, I didn't want to leave it on a bum note. It was really, really useful. And thank you to both Claire and Iain for it. I'm quite sure with the DB options paper out there and with so much going on in the world, we will not have heard the last of some of the conversations we've had during the last hour. But I'm very glad we heard them well rehearsed, and thanks to everybody for being on the call. So can we have a round of applause for our speakers and indeed for all our questions? Good stuff. Steve, over to you. I think you've got some parish notices to give out and then we can all push off.
Yeah, well, indeed. No, I'll just reiterate, thanks to Iain, thanks to Claire, for a great presentation. It is a very hot topic, and appreciate everybody's comments, and hope you enjoyed the session. The video will be up later on today on the media tab on Pension Playpen. I promise, Henry. And yeah, we wish you all well for the rest of the day. We usually on these occasions pray for peace in the East, peace in the Middle East, because we just have to, and we can't believe we're still here saying this at least 2 or 3 years later. Henry, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Crazy. And next week on Pension Playpen, we have Margaret Snowden, OBE, in conversation with. And for those of you that know Margaret, she is, I think, a very amazing person. So that'd be a really good one to join. Hopefully you can join us next week. But thanks again to Iain. Thanks again to Claire. Cheers, Henry, for being the host with the most. And really appreciate everybody's input today. And be safe. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Cheers, everyone.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers,
Cheers, Iain.
So
Thanks, Claire. Cheers. Bye. Bye.